March 1996, and the first Resident Evil game has been released. With its cinematic gameplay and classic horror elements, discussion soon turns to taking the game's story to the big screen, and Constantine Film gains the movie rights after a bidding war, and hires George A. Romero to write a screenplay. With his strong background in horror and especially zombie movies, Romero felt like the perfect fit for the franchise. But after a series of drafts, Romero was removed from the production. The first draft of George A. Romero's screenplay was leaked onto the internet, giving a glimpse into what a Romero Resident Evil movie would have looked like. Today, I'm going to be reviewing its pros and cons, comparing it to the video game, and asking the question, was it a movie? Let's find out. The Resident Evil story. The first Resident Evil game begins with a cutscene. The cutscene explains via voiceover that a strange series of murders have been occurring around Raccoon City. A special forces team named Bravo Team have been sent in to investigate and have gone missing. Alpha Team, another special forces team, and one which includes player characters Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, have been deployed to find out what happened to the first team. In a foggy forest late at night, Team Alpha finds Team Bravo's helicopter, crashed and destroyed, with Team Bravo nowhere to be found. Suddenly, Alpha Team are overwhelmed by zombified dog creatures that burst out of the fog and begin making quick work of the team members. As their helicopter flies off without them, the surviving members seek shelter in an abandoned mansion nearby.
Jill, run for that house!
The gameplay begins with the survivors of the team inside the mansion. They find blood on the walls, and eventually corpses of the first team. As they continue their search of the mansion, they find themselves attacked by zombies. Chris runs into a survivor of Bravo Team, Rebecca, a doctor with a medical background, who says the helicopter made a forced landing. Rebecca implies that the engine failure seemed suspicious. Chris also finds a diary with an entry by a doctor named John Marcus, which mentions the doctor being infected by a virus after an accident in a lab. Another letter is found, which describes more details about the apparent lab accident, with all researchers infected by a strange virus that they were working on. A virus that turned them into the living dead. Chris and Jill fend off attacks from giant snakes, giant spiders, hunters, and a killer evil plant with sentient intelligence.
Take this file with you.
Team gets word that the helicopter pilot is still flying around outside. The team then try to communicate with him over a broken radio, but get no response. A heliport can be seen out of a window, and the team decide to head to the heliport and signal the helicopter from there. The leader of Alpha Team, Captain Albert Wesker, is in no mood to leave and heads off alone to continue investigating the mansion.
I'll look around the house a little more.
The team find a diary entry that reveals that both teams were lured to the mansion to fight the virus-infected creatures. Then the entire place was to be blown up, with everything and everyone in it. An injured Bravo team member, who is near death, warns the survivors of a double-crosser before getting shot suddenly, with the unknown assailant escaping into a maze of dark passageways. Chris and Jill follow and find an entry that takes them down into a secret underground laboratory overrun by zombie scientists, and a fax detailing the outbreak of a virus called the T-virus. It also mentions a cover-up and researchers being concerned that state police and STARS special forces could intervene. The group find Wesker and accuse Wesker of double-crossing them. He explains he used to work for Umbrella Corporation, and that Umbrella was working on a virus that could turn dead soldiers into undead super soldiers. Wesker explains the accident cannot be made public, that he was sent in to take care of the problem. Wesker reveals a terrifying experimental creature in a chamber called the Tyrant, which gets loose and kills Wesker.
No!
The lab's self-destruct mechanism is triggered. The team escape to the heliport, blow up the tyrant, and eventually escape in the helicopter, with the final cutscene showing the group flying away to safety. Romero's script. This is a first draft. It's dated 7th of October 1998. The story opens in a conference room where a group of executives are watching a video on a video monitor. The video is showing a Dr. John Marcus, who is frantically pleading into the camera to keep the lab he is sealed when he is attacked by a shadowy figure as the camera falls to the floor. We then cut to a forest in early morning where we find Chris Redfield, who is feeding fish to eagles. He drops a fish on a rock, and the eagle he is feeding flies away, apparently in fear. Chris is confused, and when he turns back to the fish on the rock, the fish has disappeared. We then cut to Jill's apartment. Chris walks in, and he tells Jill that he has heard something strange up on the mountain when he was feeding eagles. Chris mentions he's part Mohawk. We also find out that Chris and Jill are in a relationship, and that he has been tracking the eagles for many years. Next, we cut to a farm where a group of horses are attacked by a creature. The attack happens from the perspective of the unseen creature, which attacks with extraordinary speed. We quickly cut to an air base where helicopters are about to take flight. We have this scene between two men whose faces we do not see. One man gives permission to the other to activate an undercover strike force. Meanwhile, Jill gets word that she's been called into action. She arrives at the front gate of a huge mansion, and she's joined by a group of tough special forces types. Immediately, the group are attacked by creatures that leap out of a ghostly morning mist. Jill's able to make an emergency call for help, a call which makes its way to Colonel Albert Wesker, who's traveling by helicopter, and says that they're about to earn their combat pay. Meanwhile, Raccoon City is being evacuated by the military. Chris escapes the chaos and races over to the farm from earlier, where he finds the horses dead. A group of helicopters fly overhead, and Chris follows them to find out where they are headed. The helicopters show up at the mansion, where Colonel Wesker and Alpha Team find human body parts and shredded uniforms from the previous team. They also immediately are attacked by zombified dogs. They hurry into the mansion itself, with Chris following undetected. Wesker tells the others there's a network of secret laboratories under the mansion, and they'll be looking for a man named Dr. John Marcus, and their mission is to bring him out alive.
Interior mansion, central hall morning. Inside the place looks like a haunted house, a glorious ruin, once spectacular, now mysterious and threatening. The chandeliers and furniture are covered with sheets that ripple on breezes from 1,000 faults in the old walls. Indistinct noises echo within the ceiling, the floor, as Alpha Team enters. Old. They probably don't have cable. They probably don't have radio. Who's they? Whose place is this? Wesker shuts the front door. The booming sound makes us wonder if we will ever see it opened again. Guy named Arclid, bootlegger, built this old fortress during Prohibition. He figured nobody'd ever find him out here in the backwoods. Nobody did, till he died. Feds have had it ever since. Place has been here for 80 years. Derelict, a safe house. A safe house. For who? For what? There's a secret installation. Below, a network of laboratories. What kind of laboratories? They didn't issue us gas masks, so I figure it's okay to breathe. Why send in a strike force? Yeah, what are we supposed to do? Polish the silver. There's a man downstairs. A top priority man. It's our job to bring him out. Hopefully there are others alive as well. We'll rescue them too, if we can. But Dr. John Marcus, he comes out alive at any and all cost.
Meanwhile, elsewhere in the mansion, we find Jill, who is still alive. She runs into and takes out a zombie in a lab coat. Wesker and his team hear the gunshots and decide to split up and check out the area. Jill runs into the others and Wesker spills the truth, that Marcus was working on a virus with financing from the Umbrella Corporation. Wesker explains the researchers were trying to create a super soldier that could not die. Lab animals were being experimented on, and researchers ended up infected and turned into zombies. One of the characters says it's like something out of a Night of the Living Dead movie. Chris falls into a giant aquarium and battles zombie sharks. He shoots his way out. The gunfire alerts the others, and Chris runs into the rest of the group. And we get a testy reunion scene between Jill and Chris. A lab coat zombie is identified as being John Marcus. So now, with their target dead, Wesker says they need to find the antidote and put a stop to the outbreak. The team make their way down into the underground labs to find the antidote. There's a scene featuring a battle with the evil intelligent plant, which also has a giant snake appear. Deep in the labs, we also find John Marcus's love interest, Ada, who is still alive. This leads us to the ending, where the place is set to self-destruct, and the team have to make a dramatic escape, while the tyrant creature is thawed out of its chamber and makes chase. Ada makes the choice to stay back and die in the lab with her creations. And the others have this conversation to talk her out of it. Chris mentions something about a evil that resides in all of us. What are we, some kind of Resident Evil? So that is the George A. Romero script for Resident Evil. So the positives about the script, the action scenes are a big plus. Romero's script does a great job at bringing the video game's action to life. Romero's script doesn't shy away from bringing the horror to the big screen. For example, one of the more memorable and terrifying moments in the video game is the zombie dogs. And the script does a great job of recreating that idea. And the way the dogs are described, with their flesh hanging off, it's all very gory and very true to the game. Almost all the boss fights from the video game are in the script. We get the giant snake, we get the killer plant, the hunters, the tyrant. They're all imaginative, unique, and well done. The plant fight in particular makes the equivalent boss fight in the video game seem tame in comparison. Romero turns a fight between heavily armed badasses and a killer plant into a terrifying sequence that is a million times better than it has any right to be. Romero also brings a sense of humanity to the story. We get a scene where Chris has a gun pointed at a zombie and then he can't quite bring himself to shoot it. And it feels like something out of a Living Dead movie. You know, it's not like some zombie movies where zombies are being blasted away without much thought. The negatives of the script. The opening of the script is a total mess. The opening is by far the weakest thing about this script. We get this stuff with Chris and the Eagles, which goes nowhere and isn't brought up again. We get a scare with this fish that goes missing. That doesn't really make any sense. We get a scene in Jill's apartment with a lot of clumsy exposition. We also get a lot of repetitive moments. For example, we get the scene at the airbase where these guys say that they are activating STAR's special forces. And then moments later, we cut to Jill being told that STARS is being activated, which makes the airbase scene a complete waste of time. The way I would fix this would be we could open with Jill. So we would open with Jill on the way to the mansion, spend some time building up horror and dread. Then the dogs attack. We get people running and screaming. The scene ends with Jill, screaming into the radio for help. Then we cut to Chris. So we get this contrast between what we just saw and this peaceful scene with the Eagles. And Chris heads back into the city, finds out the city is getting evacuated, finds out something happened to Jill. Then Chris follows these helicopters over to this mansion, so on and so on. Open with Jill's perspective, then switch to Chris's perspective for the rest. The script has a problem with revealing information way too early, and also doing it in a weak way. For example, Jill goes missing, and then the big reveal that she's still alive is done by cutting to her walking around the mansion. We just show her just walking around the mansion, and she's fine. The script feels like it's determined to give away all of the plot as fast as it can. Wesker tells us there's a secret underground laboratory. The moment they show up, we get the explanation of what the virus is, and the plan to use it to create undead super soldiers around page 30. So all of this takes a lot of the mystery out of the script. The other issue is Romero's additions to the characters' backstories are completely irrelevant. The stuff with Chris and the Eagles and being part Mohawk doesn't really go anywhere. Also, Chris is given this backstory about growing up in the mansion as a youngster. That feels like the only reason he was given this backstory was so we could have one of the characters know their way around the mansion. But beyond that, it ended up being completely unnecessary. There's a bit near the end when one of the characters refers to Wesker as a colonel. And I remember thinking, oh, right. Because it really does not come up at all. It's completely irrelevant, really. So the other thing was the violence is too much. Previously, I mentioned that it was a good thing that the script didn't shy away from the graphic horror in the video games. But I do feel like, at times, it goes a little too far. There's a scene where the team are being attacked by this plant monster, and someone gets grabbed, and it sucks their blood out of their entire body at once. Which is quickly followed by a bit where this giant snake appears, and then wraps around and crushes a guy, and then eats him whole. And then the snake's belly is ripped open, and the guy is still alive inside. His flesh is being eaten away, and he starts begging for death, before eventually being blown apart by a grenade. I mean, yeah. Yeah. There's another scene where the security lasers have been activated, and one of the STARS members activates this laser trap. And so I'm thinking, okay, at least this will be a quick, clean death. But then Romero adds, he has this detail about the lasers also triggering acid. Acid hits him, and then his flesh starts to boil. And then the guy's, he's screaming, and these zombies get hit, and their flesh starts to melt off their faces. And then we see the skeleton underneath. It just keeps going, and it's just way too much. So my thoughts overall, for a first draft, it has a lot of potential, but the opening is a mess. Romero's changes to the characters adds nothing. Violence would have to be toned down. But with more time to work out on some of the issues, there is a potentially decent, scary Resident Evil adaptation in this script somewhere. So is this a movie? No. But is this potentially a movie with a few more rewrites? Yes. So that's it from me. That was George A. Romero's Resident Evil, and I'll see you next time.